like to introduce Kate. Kate's currently doing her PhD here at Monash University, looking at community attitude towards shelter dogs, as well as the assessment of their behaviour. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Paul. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you all here today. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some preliminary research that are results of some research I did as part of my PhD. And my PhD project is looking into the assessment of shelter dogs for their adoption suitability and devising a standardised and valid assessment to assess their adoption suitability to maybe give shelters something to use. Sorry. Okay, so just some background. Like Pauline has said, we all know that dogs are very popular companion animals and popular pets in Australia, and around 37% of Australian households own at least one dog. While the majority of dogs are much loved companions, those that display undesirable behaviours, such as those pictured, are much more likely to be surrendered to animal shelters. So every year, Australian shelters and pounds receive thousands of dogs. They come in either as strays or owner surrenders. Just an example, during the 2008-2009 financial year, the RSPCA alone received almost 70,000 dogs nationally. Of these, 33% were reclaimed by their owners, 28% were rehomed, and 32% were euthanased. And a study done in 2005 by another member of the group, Dr. Linda Marston, found that her study found similar results. So she looked at the results from 3 shelters in Victoria, and she found that 46% of those dogs were reclaimed by their owners, 21% were adopted by a new owner, and 31.5% were euthanased. So when dogs are admitted into animal shelters, they typically are assessed for their adoption suitability by way of a temperament test or behaviour assessment. In general, dogs that pass the assessment are made available for adoption, whereas those that fail are either euthanased or they undergo rehabilitation and are reassessed at a later date. Accurate assessment of shelter dog behaviour is essential to protect both the welfare of the community and of shelter dogs. Okay, so the study I'm talking to you about today is the third part of my PhD research investigating the assessment of shelter dogs for adoption suitability. I'll just give you a rundown on the other parts. Part 1 involved a review of behaviour assessment protocols currently used to assess adoption suitability in Australian shelter dogs. And the results of this study will be published this year in the Journal of Applied Animal Welfare Science. Part 2 is just nearing completion, and this involved the development and validation of a standardised behaviour assessment protocol. Like I said, I'm not going to be talking about this part today, but if you're interested, come and find me during the break. I'd be happy to have a chat to you. And part 3, which I'm talking about today, is looking at community attitudes towards shelter dogs and the assessment of their behaviour. Okay, so a review of the literature and focus group sessions with experts on dog behaviour, including vets, breeders, behaviourists and shelter workers, informed the development of a questionnaire containing 4 sections. Section A contained questions about the demographic of participants, and it included a question asking if they'd ever worked or volunteered for a shelter, rescue organisation or council pound. And the reason we put this question is because our networks contain a lot of people who have worked in these places, so it was important that we found out what proportion of participants had done this. Section B looked at attitudes towards the future acquisition of a pet dog, preference to obtain a puppy versus an adult, and the likelihood that participants will acquire their new pet dog from several different sources. Section C asked about attitudes towards animal shelters and the dogs that they supply, and Section D asked about attitudes towards common shelter practices such as health and behaviour assessments. We launched the questionnaire via survey methods on the 7th of August last year, and data was collected over a 1-month period. Okay, so now on to some of the results that we found. We had 1,647 participants complete the survey. 90% of participants were female, and this is quite common for our online surveys, so you guys need to help us out a bit more in that respect. The age of participants ranged from 18 to 81, with the mean being 59. 80% of participants currently owned a dog. Over 1/3 have owned between 1 and 3 dogs over their lifetime, and another third have owned between 4 and 6 dogs. 3% of participants have never owned a dog, and 10% had owned more than 9 dogs. Interestingly, 1/3 of the participants that did the survey said they had worked or volunteered for a shelter, rescue or pound. Okay, in section B, we asked the participants to rate on a 5-point scale the likelihood that they will obtain a new pet dog in the future, and this scale ranged from very unlikely to very likely. So if you have a look at the graph, figure 1, you can see that almost half indicated that they'd be very likely, and almost 1/4 are likely to obtain a new pet dog in the future. We also asked participants to indicate their preference for a puppy versus an adult dog, and using a 7-point scale. So if you have a look at the graph, the scale ranges from strong preference for puppy to strong preference for adult. So if you look at this graph, over 1/4 of participants indicated that they had no preference, which was pretty interesting. 38% indicated a weak to a strong preference for a puppy, and 34% indicated a weak to a strong preference for an adult dog. This is interesting because our group's research has previously found that most people tend to prefer puppies, and this result may be due to the fact that around 1/3 of the participants had experience working at shelters or rescue organisations where they usually deal with adult dogs. I haven't had the chances yet, but I plan to run some stats to see if these two different groups differ in their attitudes.